Our next speaker is Meghan, and she is a planner with Southern Tier Central Regional Planning and Development Board.
This portion of the presentation, it is going to be directed more about planning near transmission pipelines. My name is Meghan Thoreau, and I do work for Southern Tier Central Regional Planning Board. The involved counties are Schuyler, Steuben, and Chemung, and my part within the planning board is mainly to help the communities plan their energy concerns and also help communities with their water resources. Before I begin, too, I should probably just note that besides working in Southern Tier Central, I did live out in Sublette County, Wyoming, where I was a planner for an energy boomtown, and I do have some background and knowledge. However, this particular presentation is mainly on pipelines and not the grand scheme of gas development. A general overview is that transmission lines are relatively safe, but the failures can be catastrophic. And in the United States, we heavily depend on pipelines, and there's approximately 1.8 million miles transporting our fuel. 100% of our natural gas and 66% of our oil are transmitted by transmission pipelines. And in the last decade, this energy demand has increased by 36%. And this presentation will cover 5 main categories. It'll show you the increased growth near pipelines, the risk involved. It'll give a brief overview of the pipelines in Tompkins County. It'll talk about possible pipeline failures and recent planning and land use tools to protect the life safety and the environment. And so before I begin, just keep in mind that this is a presentation not so much on planning for the actual pipelines, but planning for the land use that is going to be surrounding these pipelines so we can protect people, property, and an environment. So increased growth near transmission pipelines. This is a picture in the state of Washington, but I do believe it's very true of most of the rural regions here. And the transmission lines generally started out in very rural settings. There wasn't a lot of people, there wasn't a lot of roads. And the first picture is a traditional transmission line, and 12 years later, growth grew around it. And we really have to figure out how to manage that land use in case of any failures of a pipeline. Some of the risks involved. Pipeline failures have a significant impact on life, property, and the environment. Human activity does increase the risk near pipelines. Land use decisions can affect the risks associated with increased human activity near transmission pipelines. Traditional regulations have focused more on the design, the operation, and the maintenance of pipelines, and on incident responses. They have not focused on land use decisions surrounding these pipelines. And in the last decade, I'd say there has been a change, but it isn't in the mainstream yet. And state and local officials from governments need to systematically consider risk in their regulating land use. And risk-informed approaches are effective, and these are just a few examples where they're used effectively. And I just want to give you an idea that there is reason to be concerned, and these are just incidences that were serious with lives taken through a period of 91 to 2010. And the pie charts just show you how much incidences were caused of excavation or how much were caused from other cases. And the first one is the liquid pipelines, and the bottom one is the gas transmission pipelines. And this is not official, but I did find it very interesting that Wikipedia has almost all of the pipeline incidences categorized chronologically with a short description of when it occurred, where it occurred, and how many people were injured, and what type of failure it was. And so I definitely would recommend just visiting them to get more information. And if you do go to the 2012, around there, you will find more Marcellus-type incidences. When you consider a risk, this is just a general example. There's no theory. I don't want to say that it will only affect what's in red, but if there was a failure of a pipeline, a zone of a few hundred feet surrounding it would be severely at risk. And this is just a visual example of a community surrounding it and what portions of that community would be impacted. I just thought it was important because this is Tompkins County. Sharon did give an example of pipelines running through the region, and I just wanted to give a few names to the operators, which most of you are familiar with, and also just what they're transporting exactly so that you know what's going underground, which is gasoline, nitrogen, non-HVL products, and liquid petroleum gas and natural gas. And here's just a close-up of the map she showed, but it also shows you where the highly populated areas are, as well as just the generally populated areas. And it differentiates the lines between hazardous liquid and gas transmission lines. And so these would be the areas that part of this presentation would be speaking towards. It does not include the gathering lines in the picture or distribution lines, and those locally may want to consider regulating land uses surrounding those, but right now I'm focusing mainly on transmission lines. I thought that just telling you that the pipeline failures occur may not be enough, so I just wanted to give a few visuals of what it potentially could happen. This is a natural gas pipeline failure. It did happen in a similar shape of the circle that you saw. It affected 2 homes in the picture, completely blew them up, and there was a massive fire. This is some potential liability that municipal government should consider, as well as an example of a liquid pipeline failure. In the first one is a Midwest incident, but this is where you really have to be concerned if it is a liquid pipeline failure about the environmental impacts, because natural gas pipeline failures are extremely serious, but they don't produce the same environmental damage as a liquid failure. And the picture of the road construction, this is where local municipalities really should be concerned, because is it the fault of the local municipality that they didn't inform the contractor, that the contractor did something wrong, or is it the operator that didn't mark the pipe right? And there's a lot of confusion in an incident like this, and regardless of whose fault it is, it's bound to cost the municipality money to deal with. This is another failure. It's a natural gas pressure failure. There was no fire in this explosion, but it did create a huge hole. And you can see that the pressure in the pipe blew the pipe up in the upper right corner to a distance. And so if there was residents, a school nearby, a park, it's a pretty serious incident. Here's some poor planning development pipeline examples when considering developing near a pipeline. You can see a residential subdivision put the back of their homes not in the easement but directly next to it, and it's too tempting for the residents to open up their back door and not build anything, not utilize their backyard, not plant anything. So you can see from this picture there's been fences constructed, and you come back in a few years, there'll probably be trees planted, play gym sets. And if this pipeline needs to be maintained, all of that would be removed or damaged. And if there was a failure in a pipeline that's this close to residential homes, you can imagine the injuries involved or the property damage. And the second picture is a middle school campus. And I have this one here for a variety of reasons and a variety of bad planning. The pipeline was there long before it was a rural setting, and the middle school came in, and they decided that they wanted to pave over the pipeline because they didn't build anything over it structurally, but they did put pavement, which does limit the access to the pipeline maintenance. But if you look at the picture long enough, you'll notice that there's only one access in and out of the middle school. And if the failure occurred or limited that access, excavating or getting people out of the school is a problem, but also bringing in emergency vehicles or operator vehicles to deal with it is a problem. And there's a community in Washington State that passed regulations that limit institutional buildings, nursing homes, schools, any type of large structure that requires a certain amount of evacuation capacity to be at least 500 feet away from the pipelines. And it does require certain restrictions and requirements of access so that a building like this doesn't become isolated. And this is an example of consistently poor planning because, again, you have to imagine this pipeline was here. There was no houses. A developer came in and put some residential homes. The building envelopes were very narrow. They didn't provide a lot of space so that maintenance equipment could get into the backyards and deal with any type of regular maintenance they have to do on the pipelines. And over time, fences were constructed. Landscape was added, trees were added, pavement was added. In some cases, swimming pools were added. And all of this is, generally speaking, not allowed to occur on an easement for a pipeline. But for a time, at least, the operators could still access the pipeline from the backyard. But as the population increased, the road got busier, and the state highway department built a 15-foot sound wall directly behind the houses, and that completely cut off any maintenance opportunity or access to the pipeline. So if a failure did occur, getting to the pipeline becomes, yes, problematic. Here's another example. There's a lot of examples of bad planning. This particular, again, they didn't build the houses over the easement, but they had to get in there for maintenance, and there was property damage done, and it could have been avoided. And I just want to emphasize that it does occur. And these are just simple structures, but even small things can be problematic. Obviously, if there's maintenance involved, they're going to be removing stuff. But even putting in a simple play set for your children, depending on how deep you set your footings, you could hit the pipeline. You could have some issues if you're forced to remove it and cause a problem there. So even little things that you could put in the right-of-way, you have to seriously consider if that's wise or not. And with all of the failures I went through and with all of the poor planning, I mentioned that there is some positive regulations coming out of a few agencies, and I just wanted to give a short overview. And we have been showing a lot of maps lately, and I just want to emphasize that these programs, there's many map programs. Some cost money to be members, some don't. Some are only for government officials to use. And there is the National Pipeline Mapping System, and they offer a public map view, which is Tompkins County example. It allows you to click on the pipeline, and you can actually see the operator. You can see who you need to contact if you needed to do any kind of land negotiations or if you were in the middle of planning something. It gives you a phone number, an address, and oftentimes an email address, which is very important if you want to start planning properly. You want to bring a lot of the stakeholders to the table, including the operators of the pipeline. If you're a municipality, I would definitely recommend registering for this mapping program because it does offer more details that aren't shown to the general public. And I think that they would be very informative as you make your land use regulations or you're enforcing them. So I just wanted to show you that as a resource, and that land use planning and development has a direct impact on pipeline safety. I just want to emphasize that. And that adoption of certain land use practices significantly improve pipeline safety practices. Again, these regulations, the key to having these regulations in place and aspects that you have to put in these regulations are all about bringing stakeholders of the land use, the property development, together that are near the transmission pipelines. And in my research and in a lot of positive a lot of work that communities have been doing that have had some positive results have come out of an organization called Pipelines and Informed Planning Alliance, PIPA. It was initiated and supported by the Pipeline and Hazardous Material Safety Administration out of the U.S. Department of Transportation. And their goal is to reduce and improve the safety of affected communities and transmission lines through the implementation of recommended practices related to risk-informed land use near transmission lines. And their main recommendation is to make local governments very proactive in adopting recommendations that, again, bring the stakeholders together and protect and secure the safety of people, the environment, and because you're bringing operators to the table, you have to consider the safety of the pipeline infrastructure as well. And I wish I could give copies to everyone, but the plan on the screen is pretty thick, and I wanted to pass it around in case you wanted to page through it. But on the bottom corner, there is a link, and you can definitely view the PDF. I would recommend it. The main contents of the guide, it goes into some detail of the stakeholders and why you want to bring them to the table. It goes over some of the benefits and risks involved with transmission pipelines. It provides some general information and recommendations, and it has, in my opinion, a pretty informative appendices section that has model ordinances and some technical information that for municipal officials will find very useful. And I just wanted to give you a few examples of some of their recommendations. Obtain transmission pipeline mapping data. Adopt transmission pipeline consultation zone ordinance. Implement new development planning areas around the transmission lines. Participate to improve the state excavation damage prevention plans. Collaborate on alternative use and development of transmission pipeline right-of-ways. Reduce transmission pipeline risks through the design and location of new parking lots and parking structures. Reduce transmission pipeline risks through the design of location of new roads, and consider site emergency response plans to the land use developments. And for the most part, this seems like common sense, but unless it's in your regulations, there's no way to ensure that all of the reviews that are before municipalities in the site plan process would have this. And one of the recommendations mentioned the consultation zone, and I just wanted to show you, again, looking at that poor planning example that we saw, one of the regulations, it's almost like an overlay zone that you put over these transmission lines, and any development that would be within that zone requires the stakeholders to come to the table so that the operator can talk to the property owners and inform them on restrictions that they weren't aware of, so that the municipality can come in and tell them what type of landscape is okay to plant. There's certain plants, that do not have a deep root system that wouldn't affect the pipelines, and others that would. And you can just see that in this particular subdivision, they utilized the right-of-way for a recreational path. They backed the backyards up, but they didn't make the easement part of their backyard. So I thought it was a pretty effective, very simple, obvious thing to do. Here's a good example of land use planning, and again, this is an example in Washington. They're doing a lot of progressive things with pipelines. They have a lot of large pipelines living near Alaska and Canada. I wanted to give you a close-up so that you can also see that this does play a part in all types of development. And I was just surprised when I Google Earthed it how big the homes were and how expensive they were. And they were right abutting a pipeline. And why this is a good planning why this is a good example is that they did adopt a consultation zone. They maintained operator access. They minimized the road crossings, which is very important. And they turned the easement into a recreational asset. And for the most part, this community has increased its property value near the pipeline. And when I was researching it, one of the comments, the homes closest to the pipeline sold first because they wanted to use it as an amenity. Communities implementing practices by PIPA, there's a map, and you just can kind of see that it's only been a few years that they've actually had their recommendations out to the public. And since then, I was talking to some municipal planners in Pennsylvania, and I found a recent municipality that adopted some PIPA regulations, and you can call him up, and he'll be happy to email a copy of the ordinance. I put the ordinance number so that it would be quick and easy for you to refer to it, but I thought that was the closest local example I could find for you. And the bottom line of my presentation and the message I just want to share is that better planning can help ensure safe fuel transport and avoid tragedies. And I think that as a planner, that's the key, and that's the goal that we try to do. And I just want to leave my information up there if you have any questions and you don't get a chance to ask me today. I'm more than willing to talk on the phone, email, meet with you. And if you wanted any additional copies of the presentation or the slides, it's already on the website. If you go to Energy Resources, it's under the natural gas page of our website. So thank you very much.